Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Elliott Parker, CEO of Elliott Partners, a venture builder that co-creates advantage startups with corporations and entrepreneurs. He previously launched dozens of startups at High Alpha, the pioneering venture studio, and helped Fortune 100 firms design and execute growth strategies at Clayton Christensen's firm Innosight. Elliott is passionate about helping big organizations move fast and think boldly, and wrote The Illusion of Innovation to inspire transformation through bold experimentation. Elliott, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'd love to have you start off by sharing with our listeners more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I run Alloy. We are a venture builder, as you mentioned. We build what we call advantage startups in partnership with world-class entrepreneurs and usually large corporations. Our thesis is that if we can combine the best of both large corporations and startups into our approach, everybody's better off. We can build startups that are more likely to succeed and to get to big outcomes faster. And the corporations that we work with are more likely to access innovation that would otherwise be hard for them to access on their own.
Mhm.
Before that, yeah, I've spent my career in building things inside of corporations and as an entrepreneur, and many formative years, as you mentioned, at Clayton Christensen's firm Innosight, where we learned a lot about what works and what doesn't in innovation inside of big companies.
Mhm. And so I'm curious to hear how you go through co-creating these startups through Alloy. If you could walk us through what that might look like.
So yeah, it usually it begins with identification of a theme of interest, usually with these corporations. Occasionally, companies will come to us and say, "We have an idea, or we've built something inside the corporation, and we'd like to spin it out. Can you help us do that?" That happens sometimes, but most of the time, we're beginning with a broad theme, a problem area. A corporation is saying, "Hey, um, we have a strategic question we're trying to answer. We can't figure out how the future is going to look, or we have a problem inside our business that we need help with." And so a theme might look like it might be something like we have too much inefficiency in our supply chain.
Mhm.
So maybe it's a business problem they have. It might be a business problem that their customers have, where if the problem were solved for customers, those customers would be stronger customers for the corporation, but maybe the problem isn't something the corporation wants to do or isn't on strategy. In other instances, it's simply a set of challenges or competitors that you see coming down the road. We don't know what to do with about AI and advanced manufacturing. Can you help us sort through this? It turns out building startups is a great way to run experiments and to learn. We say all the time there's no data about the future. The only way you get data about the future is by taking action. Action creates data, and building startups is a great way to take action and see around corners, see what the future might look like. And so we can take a space like that where there are more questions than answers, go build some startups with really good entrepreneurs and see what we learn. And that helps corporations be better prepared for the future, more optionality in the future, as well as lessons they can apply into their core business.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point that a corporation might identify a problem that could become a business, but they don't necessarily want to be solving that problem themselves within their own corporation. In addition to that, what are some other reasons why a corporation might choose to spin out a startup rather than keeping it in-house under their own corporation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, the primary thing is that to bear in mind is what corporations are designed to do. Corporations are very good at scaled global execution in a capital efficient way. That means they can solve problems. Corporations are an amazing invention, right? If you think about it, a corporation is just an idea. At its base, there's a contract, there's a piece of paper in there that forms the corporation, and thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people organize around that promise, that set of promises. They promise each other to do certain things, and in that way are able to solve really big problems at scale. That is a crazy thing that we do as people. It's an amazing invention, that limited liability corporation, the idea that people can come together, limit their risk and their liability if something goes wrong, take the chances and go solve big problems. You know, if you go back a few hundred years, there were no corporations. It was mostly governments trying to solve things or quasi-government types of organizations. Limited liability corporation is a great invention, but it's good for certain things. Scaled execution in a capital efficient way. Corporations are very good at preserving what they've already built,
Mhm.
at preserving what exists. And so when you run a large corporation, if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, your job is to not screw things up. Your job is to make sure that that corporation perpetuates and continues to be successful. And the way that you do that is you do that by taking great care to avoid risk. And so inside of corporations, we see decisions made by committees. It takes a long time to do things. These are all features of those systems, not bugs. That's the corporation preserving itself and making things as predictable and safe as possible. The flip side of that strength is that it gets really hard to learn. And as the world changes around these corporations, that approach to operating at scale carefully is just absolutely opposed to learning, which often comes through making mistakes.
Mhm.
And so startups, on the other hand, are really good at making mistakes. They're optimized for it. Their governance, their incentive systems, the talent they attract people who are excited about this idea of learning through making mistakes because they know if they do figure out something new, some secret, it can pay off really handsomely. And so they're willing to take a lot of risk. They don't have anything to preserve. They're trying to find ways to replace what exists.
Mhm.
And so you've got two fundamentally opposed systems, right? The corporation needs to be able to learn to adapt, but it can't. The startup, on the other hand, needs to at some point to be able to execute at scale and to do it quickly, but it can't because it's busy making mistakes and learning. So the idea is if you're at a large corporation, you need to find new structures for governance and incentives, access to talent that allow you to make mistakes and to learn. It turns out that in the world of business, startups are the best way to do that. And so we work with these large corporations to build startups outside so that they can learn and that they can learn much, much faster than they could on their own. We've got just so many examples in our portfolio of corporations that learned through these little startups we built and radically changed their core business as a result.
Yeah, and that was actually was what I was going to ask you next is for you to share some examples that you've really enjoyed being a part of how you've helped those corporations create startups.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I spent years trying to help large corporations transform through new venture creation. And most of the time, most of my career was spent doing that. We're building ventures inside of the corporation.
Mhm.
Because logically, that makes sense. You've got very smart people, you know where the problems are, you've got access to capital. In theory, you could go beat any startup, go build a venture inside a corporation, but the incentives are wrong. The governance, the way you make decisions is wrong, as I've discussed. And so what we've learned over time, you have to push these things as far outside the corporation as you can. My old colleague, Clayton Christensen, he said when he described the innovator's dilemma, I wrote a book almost 30 years ago about that. What he said was for corporations, as they move up market to serve their best customers, they leave themselves exposed at the low end. New entrants come in with good enough products that seem inferior to what already exists, but they grab a foothold in the market, move up market themselves, and displace the incumbents. That's a really hard problem to solve if you're the incumbent. And what Clay proposed 30 years ago, the solution to the innovator's dilemma, is to make sure that you can innovate as far from your core as possible. And what we've learned is that most corporations just don't go far enough. You can actually go all the way outside the corporation. And so I can think of examples. One, for example, working with a utility that this amazing business they're busy converting a lot of their power plants, trying to live up to sustainability promises they had made, find ways to produce power more sustainably and at a lower cost for their customers. And we're trying to convert some of their coal plants to biomass plants, so burning agricultural waste, other forms of biomass waste that would otherwise be going into landfills or burned or whatever. And they converted a couple of coal plants and found that they didn't have a steady supply chain biomass to run these plants. And now they were stuck. They wanted to convert more plants, but weren't sure if they were going to be able to run the plants to produce the power that they needed. But they made all these promises. And so we built a startup called Woodchuck that goes and effectively built that biomass supply chain for power plants. And within 6 months of its launch, was producing high quality, steady supply of biomass, more biomass than the initial two power plants could handle.
Wow.
And so thus, giving the utility kind of proof that we can continue proceeding down this path of running more biomass plants.
Hmm.
I can think of another example with a corporation in animal health industry. They sell feed additives and for commercial animals, as well as a lot of products for companion animals. And we built a startup called Athian that runs a marketplace, created a marketplace for carbon credits, carbon insets in the dairy industry. In other words, ways to help farmers adopt new behaviors, including products from the corporation we are working with that might make their cows more environmentally friendly. Um, and Athian created a way for these farmers to get paid in doing this. And so now the corporation we're working with has a new form of distribution channel. They can sell their products, these feed additives, to farmers, and the farmers might make money using these products. That's a pretty interesting sales proposition that didn't exist before we created the startup. That startup's in the last year and a half, 2 years, I believe, they've paid out. I think it's over $18 million to farmers now.
That's
So
amazing.
it's making a huge difference. So we see lots of examples of corporations learning, developing optionality for the future, being better prepared for the future, seeing around corners, and changing the narrative that the market tells about the corporation because we're putting this innovation outside and shining a light on it.
Mhm.
And it's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me wonder too, when would it be a mistake for a corporation to have a startup? Like, is there any type of example or scenario where it's better for them to not create something separate and just keep it right in-house?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, innovation comes in many forms, right? If you think about, you've got lots of ways to kind of categorize innovation. You've got core innovation that's close to our existing business, maybe things that might be a little bit adjacent. And then you've got the ideas that are way out there, transformative ideas. Or you might think about we do efficiency innovation inside a corporation. That's a very common form of innovation. How do we do things faster, cheaper than we did yesterday? Corporations are really good at efficiency innovation. Generally, efficiency innovations should be pursued inside the corporation, not done through an external startup. You just don't need to. You can do it yourself, and corporations are already really good at it
Mhm.
because it's applying the same model, just doing it in a more capital efficient way. The governance incentives of corporation push that type of innovation. So, kind of a way to think about it, and this is way oversimplified, but at the core, it comes down to what type of problem or opportunity are you dealing with. And a framework that we like to use, again, oversimplified, is that you've got two types of problems. You've got learning problems and execution problems. An execution problem is where you know what the problem is, you know what you need to do, you just need to go do it. Corporations are going to beat startups at execution problems every day. Corporations are great at executing. And a good test is if you've got an idea for a solution, can you build a spreadsheet predicting how the next 12 months are going to play out with some degree of confidence? If so, you're probably dealing with an execution problem, and that's something a corporation should usually do internally. Um, a learning problem, on the other hand, is where you know what the problem is, you don't know what the solution is yet. In fact, the solution's somewhat ambiguous. You're gonna have to try things and figure stuff out. You're probably going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. Startups are going to be corporations at learning problems all day long, every day. And so we think about when we're looking at opportunities, um, most of the problems that a corporation faces are execution problems, by the way, or things that the corporation should be doing on its own or in partnership with another company that already exists. It's the minority of problems. Maybe let's call it 20% of the problems a corporation's dealing with might fit the model of let's go build an external startup to solve this.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, you worded it perfectly earlier that no one learns better than startups. And so, as you shared with these learning problems that they might have, it's like the perfect opportunity. I don't want to say to necessarily be a guinea pig, but to just kind of try all these different tests and experiments to see how you might be able to solve that problem that might be happening.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so I'm curious to hear more about your journey with starting Alloy. Like what made you want to go off on your own and create your own company compared to what you had been doing previously?
So Alloy spun out of our venture studio called High Alpha. About 10 years ago, some friends of mine created High Alpha. They had started and been involved in a company that had scaled and sold to Salesforce quite successfully and wanted to go build more startups, formed High Alpha with this idea that if we have a team of people that are really good at launching things, coupled with a venture fund that could deploy capital into the things that they launch, you could systematically crank out a bunch of high quality companies and produce good returns, produce high alpha for the investors. And so they started that, and it worked. And I credit them, my friend and colleague at High Alpha, Christian Anderson, one of the founders there, actually coined the term venture studio about 10 years ago because you had a studio, like a design studio, which was his background, plus a venture fund. And there wasn't a word for this. It wasn't, other people tried versions of the model before, but there wasn't a word for it. He called it a venture studio, and that kind of took off. And now it's funny to see around the world over 1,000 venture studios in operation. But we began at High Alpha launching companies. Think of High Alpha operated like a venture capital fund that incubated startups rather than investing. It did some investing in external startups too, but it was incubating startups internally. And we started running experiments with corporations to see if partnering with corporations could lead to better outcomes. Partnering with corporations, maybe it could help us identify better ideas for startups. It might enable us to build startups where you've already got a first customer lined up, maybe a potential acquirer. And so we started trying that out and found that it worked quite well. And in 2020, we decided there was enough of an opportunity there that we ought to spin Alloy out of High Alpha. We originally called it High Alpha Innovation, rebranded it later as Alloy. Alloy being that blend of things, blend of metals to make something stronger, better. So that blend of corporate and entrepreneurship that makes something better for everybody. So yeah, 2020, we started right before COVID. We spun out and started began launching startups exclusively with corporations. Over time, we did some work with universities. We've done some work with universities over the years as well. But primary focus is on building startups with corporations as partners. And turns out our hypotheses in the beginning were true. Yeah, it's access to really good ideas and problems, kind of a deeper level of understanding. And then we can build startups that really do have advantages because of their association with the corporations that are in the mix.
Definitely. And I'm curious to hear if, with the corporations and startups that you're working with, if you notice a particular like industry or sector that may have more opportunities to solve problems compared to another. Like if you see, like for example, I'm wondering if maybe something like industrial or manufacturing might have something that can be more modern, so to say. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that and perspective.
Yeah, we've built startups in just about every industry you can imagine. And we've built or invested in close to 40 companies now over the
Mhm.
last 5 years. And what we see is if you look at kind of our across our portfolio, where have we built the most companies? It's definitely in those industries that are experiencing disruption more acutely. So things like financial services and healthcare are a couple of big examples where there's just a lot of innovation or a lot of inefficiency and pain
Mhm.
um, that we can solve through new startups. But we've built things across industries, and the thing that's been most gratifying, one of the things that's been most gratifying over the last 5 years of doing this is that there is no shortage of ideas. I remember somebody a few years ago asking, "Aren't you worried you'll run out of ideas for new companies?" No, no, we're swimming in ideas. There is endless amount of opportunity in ideas. Pick an industry. Give me any industry, and our team within a few days will identify companies worth launching in that industry, which makes what we do a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think too, solving one problem could expose you to another problem. So to your point, it's like there's never going to be ideas that you run out of because as things continue to change, that creates the opportunity for more problems or challenges to arise.
Exactly. So well said. Yeah, there's a great scientist philosopher in the UK, David Deutsch, who says that the best experiments lead to more experiments, meaning you run that experiment, it challenges something you previously thought was true, and you discover something new, and that leads you to want to do more. We see that all the time in startups. Every problem leads to, that you solve, every solution that you create leads to new problems.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, endless opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, if corporations come to you already with a problem in mind, or if it ever happens where a corporation comes to you and they don't have a problem in mind and they might say, find a problem for us. We want to make a startup.
Yeah, it's both. If you think about there's a spectrum on one end of the spectrum, it's we built a thing and we want to spin it out. To the other end of the spectrum is just help us be more innovative.
Hmm. Yeah.
We've done everything along that spectrum, and we can jump in at any point and quickly get to ideas. It takes us on in best case scenario, we can go from a rough theme or set of problems to a launch company in about 8 weeks. Usually it takes a little
Wow.
bit longer, maybe 12 to 16 weeks, but um, we can move pretty quickly.
Yeah, which that is really interesting too, because someone might assume that it's just so much longer. And so I think that's really impressive that the runway is so short. And I'm curious to hear how you're able to achieve that, how you're able to make it anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks.
It's the power of incentives, right? As fast as we can move, our entrepreneurs who are amazing can move even faster in our portfolio. And so our goal is to get that entrepreneur in place as soon as we can and see what they can go figure out. I remember talking to a friend at a corporation once who was beating up an idea they had internally for a new venture. And they had been going back and forth on the merits of the idea. Spent over a year, a couple of years actually analyzing the opportunity. They'd hired consultants to do the market research to figure out is there something here to design what the product and the business could look like. And I think at that point when we were talking, the corporation had already invested something like $10 million exploring the opportunity, but had not even built a product really yet. I think they had a prototype. And I remember him asking me, he's like, okay, we've done all this research. We're ready to go, ready to build something and get it in the hands of customers. He said, how long would it take you to get a prototype in the hands of customers if you were doing this? And I was like, well, today's Thursday. I don't know, Monday or Tuesday next week. And it was like he was expecting an answer along the lines of months. It's
Yeah.
the power of incentives. In our business model, we are not incentivized to take a long time. We're incentivized to launch things as quickly as we can, to get to truth as fast as possible, because in our business model, we have an ownership stake in all the things that we build, and that's what pays off for us in the long run. We're making a bet that that portfolio that we're building is going to be worth quite a bit someday.
Hmm.
So the sooner we can get to that portfolio, the better off we are. That makes us move really fast. But like I said, our entrepreneurs move even faster. They'll jump into these startups with tremendous incentives on the bad side and the good side, carrot and stick incentives. They want to figure it out even faster than we do, and they can
Yeah,
do amazing things.
absolutely. And as we get into 2026, I would love to hear your predictions on where you see things going in your space. That's a little bit broad, but I'm curious to hear things that you might be thinking about as we get into the new year.
Yeah, it's the best time in the history of humanity to be building new companies. Such an amazing time to be alive and to be doing what we do. I'm just endlessly optimistic. That doesn't mean I don't believe things are going to be easy from here on out. Quite the contrary. The types of problems we encounter are going to be bigger and harder than we can even imagine. But I'm optimistic in the sense that our capacity to address those problems is going to continue to increase.
Mhm.
And you look at the trends in company formation, how many people does it take to launch a company these days? How much capital is required to launch a company? Those numbers are going down. So it's easier than ever to launch startups. You can do it with fewer people and less capital than ever before, which means in our business, what we're seeing is we can launch companies a lot more efficiently than we could. Some of our recent entrepreneurs that we brought into these businesses, they plan on these businesses being huge companies, huge, let's call $100 million or more exit. So big, decent size outcomes. And they never plan on hiring more than 5 people. That is a total change from even 5 years ago. You just didn't hear things like that. So there's a lot more efficiency around building companies. You can do it with fewer people, less capital. So the power of the individual is increasing. We have more access as individuals to knowledge, ideas, truth, secrets, which you need as an entrepreneur, and more access to capital than ever before. And so that makes it an amazing time to be an entrepreneur and to go do big things. We're gonna see here soon $1 billion and maybe even $1 trillion companies created by a single individual or small team of individuals. We've already seen that $1 billion plus, but there may be a teenager sitting in their bedroom somewhere who's already launched that one person $1 trillion company. We just don't know it yet. They're coming, and that's amazing.
Yeah. And I'm curious to hear if you think that's happening because of AI or why you see that coming down the line.
Yeah, there are a few reasons why it happens. AI is part of the puzzle, but I think you could step out and look beyond just AI and the immediate application of AI and see kind of how this works broadly across history. If you go back to, for example, to ancient Egypt, for 3,500 years, that civilization it survived and thrived, but it didn't really progress technologically. There were, you know, modest changes over time. They invented some amazing things like tables and spoons and cheese and pies. Like these were marshmallows were invented in ancient Egypt. So they invented amazing things. But if you were to go to ancient Egypt in 2500 BC or 1000 BC, over 1500 year span, things would look relatively similar. And maybe it was the wrong time span, but same clothes, same technologies, culture, yeah, some changes to religion, culture, etc., but not what you'd expect across 3,000 years. And the reason why is that they had to come up with things. They didn't have tables and spoons when they started. They had to invent the building blocks.
Mhm.
And so the rate of technology it advances when you have access to building blocks, so other people's ideas, and you have communication within the network. When you have those two things, so lots of ideas and ability to share those ideas easily, the rate of technological change increases. And so in 2025 to 2026, we have access to more ideas than ever before and more communication than we've ever had in the history of humanity. I can pick up here we are having a Zoom call, right? We can pick up almost for free to speak to anyone face to face over a screen across the world to share ideas. And that's never happened before in the history of humanity. So more ideas, easier to share them. It means the pace of change is going to increase. And it's easy to say that, but the pace of change, it it not only increases, it increases exponentially. So yes, we will see the amount of innovation increasing, but the pace, it's the pace of change that increases exponentially, which means it's hard for our brains to process how weird and different the future is going to be very, 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 very soon. And
Mhm.
that's exciting. So
Yeah.
yes, AI plays a part of that because it helps us with the access to ideas. It helps us with the speed of communication, but it's not the sole driver. It's those two big threads, amount of ideas, amount of communication that drive technological change over time.
Yeah, I love that. And on that note, speaking of like new ideas coming up, I'm curious to hear if there was someone in the tech world that you could give a shout out to that you really admire right now or is working on something really cool. I'm curious to hear who that might be. So it could be a founder, could be someone else in venture, really anyone's fair game.
Oh, so many people. I mean, I just admire entrepreneurs as a class of people.
Mhm.
Just deep, deep admiration for entrepreneurs and what they do. You look around us, everything that we see like the quote is, everything you see around you was somebody's passion project.
No, I love
This whole
that.
built world around us did not need to exist this way. But it was created through entrepreneurs and lots of different flavors who made these things happen. And so we need more entrepreneurs and we need more of them to be successful. And I've kind of devoted my career to doing that at Alloy. That's what we do. In the end, we're trying to enable more entrepreneurs to be successful and then to enable those big corporations that we work with to continue creating societal surplus and benefits for a long time to come.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs, just as a class, I think are heroic what they do. It's hard for people who are not entrepreneurs to understand the deep level of risk, of terror, and
Mhm.
also of euphoria that entrepreneurs feel when they go through that process of building a company. and they the rest of us benefit from that experimentation that they do. And I'm just so grateful for entrepreneurs. We need more of them.
Yeah, 100%. And for anyone who's listening to this episode who is interested in chatting with you and learning more about what you do at Alloy, I'd love if you could share with our listeners where they can find you online.
Yeah, hit me up on X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days, ER Parker, or on our website is alloypartners.com.
Perfect. And I'll include those links in the show notes so that our listeners can easily find you from there. But Elliot, thank you so much again for coming on this week's episode of Built and Backed.
Thanks a bunch. Great to be here.